Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name's Andy Libson, and again, joined by Kenny Zepeda and Jessica. And as you can notice, we're missing Eduardo. He's still on vacation in Colombia. He'll be back in July. But we are joined by Allison. Allison is a mother and independent researcher in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She blogs at the intersection of race, finance, and technology at Wrench in the Gears. And I'll put the Wrench in the Gears link below. I want to remind people we are online at what-s-left.webnode.com, and you can find our blog in the episode notes. And please subscribe, rate, or review, and turn on your notifications. So welcome, Allison.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me time again.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
I'm always excited to have you on. Always a little nervous to see what we're going to talk about. But I was thinking about, do you remember something called the Sharper Image magazine?
Uh-huh.
I used to be excited about the Sharper Image magazine because it always had these cool like gimmicks, like these like electronic things that are like for the future. Like, but you know, I think of you as like the Sharper Image magazine for all the cool and crazy gimmicks that the capitalist class has in store, fucking up our lives. You're like that magazine that has all, you flip through it and you see all the crazy
I'm like
shit
2 years ahead.
Yeah. So, Jessica, welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah. How was your trip?
It was awesome.
Okay.
Just lots of sunshine and good food, and my Spanish still sucks, but it's a little better than it was before. So
excellent. Congratulations. So today, right here, we're going to discuss a 9-part series that Allison wrote, and we're not going to discuss the whole series. I think I'm going to let Allison describe what this whole series was about and why she did it, but we're going to kind of discuss our different impressions of going over this material. We recommend people themselves who listen to this take the time to go through this. We're not going to go through everything on here. But Allison, can you say a little bit about what prompted you to produce this series, and what generally do you think is the thread that runs through it? Because we're going to talk about a lot of things today.
Yeah. Well, so I initially started out doing a sort of a big relationship map around this proposed legislation for this California trust framework, which, while they don't call it blockchain, is essentially, it's Robert Hertzberg introduced it. His district is in the northern part of Los Angeles, and that would be the infrastructure for digital identity in California. And we know that California, both like as the most populous state, and then and the next Texas, that they're looking to get people as human capital commodities onto blockchain. And it's been interesting to me to see the different narratives and how they have to pitch it to both California, progressives in California, and then conservatives in Texas, and try to like thread the needle and get everybody excited about blockchain. And the progressives need to get excited about it for like wraparound services and pre-K and, housing wraparound services. And then in Texas, it's like liberation and, freedom and free markets. And so this system is going to be appealing to both. So we started looking into it and examining Robert Hertzberg's connection to Nicholas Berggruen, who's a billionaire financier, and work that they were doing back in 2011, this blueprint for California, which was sort of an elite bipartisan group of people to fix broken government in California, and essentially laid the groundwork for this. And there were only 16 members of this sort of group. Again, it's a private group. This is not an elected group, to sort of lay out the future of California. And one of the 16, like, it includes Eric Schmidt, of Google. So it's very clear these are very connected folks in this space. And then as I was going through, I realized it builds off of our conversations that we had around the conditional cash transfer, in that around the same time, I can't remember who brought it to my attention, but like the sterilization program in California that happened between, I think, 1909 and up until the early 70s, that it was formally discontinued. And California was by far the state that did the most institutional sterilizations of people who were deemed deficient in some way, right? And this really ramped up during the Depression, actually, which so it was framed as, again, population management. But again, the people who were asserting it were predominantly very affluent men, scientists who were saying, well, we need to take care of these deficient, like unproductive citizens. And this was happening at the same time that there was increased immigration from Mexico, and China and things like, it was anti-immigration sentiment. And so they were just, doing this reproduction control system. And in fact, it very much informed the Nazi racial hygiene program. And everybody's very proud of this, And so I was looking into seeing like who these people were. And many of them were actually leaders of California higher education. The first president of Stanford, like many of these people, it was the Human Betterment Foundation. It was based in Pasadena. And so you look at this and then you look forward to now we're approaching a new era of mass dispossession, not unlike the Depression. And we've been conditioned, many people over the last 2 years to trust the science. And then I keep thinking, wow, like we really need to look back at what's happening within California's eugenics history. But not just that. My impression based on, really trying to center Stephen Newcomb's work around the domination principle and the pivotal role of the California Spanish mission system and all of this, that it's a scientific management approach to natural life, right? Like to existing natural systems, and an imposition from the outside to say, like, now we know what lives have value, which lives don't, how to improve lives, which is the human capital finance program. And so for me, because California is such a major player in impact investing, in the rollout, like, Web 3.0 mixed reality is, kind of it's not exclusively, but California, Silicon Valley plays a really central place. Also Los Angeles, also San Diego in the bio-nanotechnology. So I keep thinking, like, I wanted to talk with you guys about it because I know at least you guys are West Coast, like how this fits in with like all of that plus manifest destiny and digital empire. Because to me, I find the history really interesting because it, like today I had someone tweet me, and again, a well-intentioned person who came from the education privatization space, and I looked at this person's tagline and it was like, I'm a person fighting the communist takeover of education. Like that was the tagline. And I'm like, and this is somebody who actually engages like pretty thoughtfully on my posts. And I'm like, how can you have been following me for the last at least 2 years? And then you have that on your, like, straight out as how you identify on this social media platform. Because again, I'm not any ism. Like I'm not an ism, but clearly this stuff is about capital. Like, I'm not saying that the left has its own stuff going on, and there's definitely the polarity serves the function. So I'm like, oh, there's just stuff we have to unpack. And like, sometimes I feel like if we can dial it back into history, it's not so like, if we can get it back before the Cold War, like people might be able to see the story a little bit better, and that it's an imperial story. And guess what? Like all of education has trained us in the stories that we need to do to live in the empire and not notice it. And I think California does a really good job at that. So anyway.
Do you hear that barking, unfortunately? Okay.
It's okay. We like dogs.
All right. God. All right.
It sounds like you're in Latin America.
Kismo, he loves to bark during what's left. I don't get it. Thanks, Allison. Yeah. And I guess today's discussion, when I talked with Allison about this, when I talked with you about it, you kind of were saying like, well, let's just see what kind of comes up for us as we went through it. And maybe what I'd like to do is either start with you, Jessica, or you, Kenny. How many of the articles did you kind of get through? I got through with the first 7. I got 2 more to go.
It's not a leaderboard, Andy.
Well, no, just to give a sense of how much, of how much you were able to cover that you had an impression from. So and then some impressions you had as you kind of went through the material. Who would prefer to start? Maybe Kenny or Jessica?
I can.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, a lot of this stuff, or at least I got through the first four, work stuff, whatever. But we've talked about a lot of this stuff in some way, but and I think that a lot of the clips were very helpful in the kind of summarizing and synthesizing the ideas that some of these people pushing this stuff, have in mind. And it also, it's kind of surreal to see how they casually speak about, changing humanity, engineering society, synthesizing technologies, with humans. Like the very first clip that I remember was the Dr. Ru, I think. He was talking about basically human enhancement and genetic editing, the implications of that. I don't know if we can show that at some point, but that is just one element of the multi dimensions of what is happening, right? It's not just about the way we study, we do health. It's about the way we interact with people. It's about the way we relate to each other, the way we relate to nature, the way nature is just again engineered to the way we're playing. I guess these people are playing God, playing gods, and they have no problem with it. Even in that same clip, I remember what he talked about. Essentially, what I understand is fuck evolution.
We're gonna change the human germline.
Exactly. Why we can control it. And of course, there are going to be problems. Of course, there's going to be some sort of ethical issues. He compares that issue with the abortion issue, right? And how polarizing that is. And I have questions about that, whether we even are going to have debates by the time this is so much, so integrated into our lives. And then also just thinking about the implications, right, of sure, let's assume this thing can be good, right? Let's assume, right, like editing, you can make people's lives better. It doesn't, this is not separate from the inequalities that are have been constructed in this system, under capitalism especially. Who do you think are the superhumans are going to be of the future? Who are going to get first access to? I actually think, I've thought, and this is, call me a conspirational theories, but like, it just so happens that out of like Hollywood people have had twins, it just so happens so, it just so happens that a lot of athletes, are getting these like, highly advanced technology, therapeuticals, in other countries, not in the US, but they go to Germany, to spin their blood and inject it back into their knee, and their back, it didn't bounce back, and again, this is an issue of, a group of people who are going to design humans, not just with higher physical ability, but higher intellectual ability and all these things, right? Let's call it a good thing, or enhancement, but they are the ones who are rule us right now, and they're going to perpetuate their rule over us. It's not about democracy, at no point, and that is so omitted from at least that first video clip. That
tokens. You're going to get some democratic tokens for the collective. That's how they're selling it.
Yeah, and so again, it's that it just misses, and I think that is kind of the a general sense that I get from these people, that they talk about fixing society or the different elements of society, without addressing the root cause, of our issues, and it's all about, I think you said it in one of your articles, Allison, where basically they don't want to clean up the world that they messed up. They just want to engineer the way out of it, or and that will create new consequences and repercussions, and of course there is money to be made, and with that comes power as well. And so it's still a level of, I hope, naivete by some of these people, but I do think they tend to, like, just like any salesman, any salesperson, they sell the good parts, and they want to hide the sinister parts, which in reality I think are the most important parts, because in order to govern people, masses of people, dispossess people, you have to hide the ugly parts, until the system is running, and then, like, everyone sees the consequences of this stuff, and then it ties us back to the mRNA stuff, and how many people just dismiss this, just take it, just whatever, and without realizing how closely related to gene editing mRNA is. And people in the scientific field that I know, friends who have accused me of conspiratorial spreading disinformation, who are in those industries, completely missed that, because they were just excited by the, like little kids, by the future. And I was that person too, by the possibilities of technology, the possibilities of controlling things and making them better. But again, the evidence shows that trying to make things better creates repercussions and ripples that they're not even aware of. And so that's, again, just one element, right? Gene editing. And then, we're talking about the mind, we're talking about the synthesis of other technologies with the body. And so, yeah, this is a very dense topic. That's the first thought for me, in terms of the ability of a few people to make superhumans, or, super workers, or super rulers of the world too.
I just want to chime in just about, like, telling the story. Something I encountered on Twitter in the last day or so. There's a gentleman, his name is Cesar Hidalgo, and he's Chilean, and he got his, I'm trying to think, he taught for a while at MIT Media Lab. And he's the gentleman, he has all these TED Talks about democracy. And he's the one who is asserting this idea that you will have a digital twin and we'll have this radical democracy, and your digital twin will just know you and it will vote for you. And I was kind of shocked, because somehow I came across on Twitter a thread where essentially he was unpacking that he had a terrible tenure experience at MIT. And essentially he was thrown under the bus with very little consideration and no response. And he felt that it had to do with, like, being a Hispanic academic and being pushed out, like, in the community. And now, I mean, he's since moved on and he has his own collective learning lab in Toulouse, France. So it's not like he, just, ran into a dead end, but, he had this really, like, long Twitter thread about it. And at one point he said, I thought I was a player, but I was just a pawn. And I'm thinking, and yet he's still selling all the stuff he developed at MIT Media Lab. Now he's in France selling it. Like, he's still doing all these talks on digital democracy, even though he personally, like, went into a field feeling like, hey, like, I'm a big fish in a little pond, and I've got, my future ahead of me, and everyone likes me, and I've got my TED Talks and all these things. And then life comes in and says, you think you're cool, but you're not so much. Like, the war machine, like, literally, MIT is the war machine, and MIT Media Lab is the mind war machine, right? He goes into the mind war machine, he works for them, and then gets treated badly. And then, like, the course correction is still just repeating the same thing he was doing there in another location. And so to me, it's quite, like, I think that's the challenge, is, like, how do we get through the narrative of people who are either conditioned, to even people who are supposed to be highly intelligent, or for their own self-interest, just, like, bounce back and get back in the rut because that's what you do. And so I guess I was just thinking about, like, how does this unfold? Because the managerial class, the people who are credentialed in it, even when they're treated horribly, just come back and they keep doing it. So anyway, that's the democracy part. But yeah. And in the gene stuff, one of the articles, and you guys probably didn't get to it, and it was a bit of a sidebar, but I had a bit of a meltdown with a friend. We were tending these city trees, and we were pulling weeds in these pits. And you guys are in city environments, like, like the weeds, they come back. It's a wild, like it's an urban jungle. Like there's stuff and like the way in which the weeds were treated, like, which it was its own little jungle. Like it was this little, like 6x6 foot ecosystem. And yes, these things needed tending, but I was going to compost the stuff. So at least their life had meaning, right? Like you pull all the nutrients out of the soil and they were just like, no, it's trash. It's all trash. And I kept thinking, like, in this mission framework, who gets to say what life has value under what circumstances? Because we went from a place of like an untidy, unkempt thing to like totally scoured, gray, dead soil, but it was tidy, and that's the way, like, that's how this struggle over the gene editing. I don't know. It's all just super, like making people super, like some of it may be actually creating chronic illness that then you can milk for data, like milk for remote monitoring around cardiac stuff, milk for remote monitoring around neurological stuff. Like, I feel like while I don't necessarily buy into a mass genocide, I do know that these people are market shaping for their wearable technologies. So on the one hand, it's superhuman, like maybe if you figure you've got it really right. But on the other hand, it's also making markets for excess labor to be like, okay, now your labor is to sit there and wear your wearable and behave so that we can make our impact markets.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I told you guys before we started filming, I had limited time. So I blitzed through kind of like bird's eye a lot of the parts and then kind of like dipped down and took my time in a few different spaces. But just one of the things, just listening to you talk right now, Allison, and thinking about like just how much of this is so not new. And I think, for those of us that are like the past 2 years or even the past like 5-10 years, whatever, like the interventions and just material changes in our lives, like the ones that have kind of been thrust upon us, like it can feel jarring, and reading your work can feel jarring and like very overwhelming at times. And because it feels like, whoa, this is some crazy dystopian future. But then like reading the parts about the history, it's not like this like market shaping that you're just talking about a minute ago, the eugenics, sterilization, the machine madness, like all of it, it's been going on forever. And I think it's interesting that you said about like, just in terms of sort of getting people to, I don't know, just like open their mind and see it, see the imperial nature of it, right? And that, what did you say? Like, if we can kind of get pre-Cold War, I think that's an interesting, like, I don't know, theory or attempt. Like, if we can get back into a little bit, before, like a few generations, would people more easily be able to see the connections? And I don't know, because I think like one of the things that I always kind of stress with my students in a lot of my classes is like this myth that progress is somehow like automatically linear, right? And that like whether it's like rights gaining or technological progress, right? Like things just keep getting better and better, right? Because I think a lot of young people feel that way. Like we're brought up to feel that way, especially in spaces like the San Francisco area where you guys are, and Seattle where I was. They make you feel like, like all this stuff, like we just invest enough money and steal enough labor, right? And like we can solve all these problems, and it'll be green and it'll be equitable and it'll be like this utopia. Anyway, I'm going off, but I actually, one of the ones I spent a little bit more time on was, there's a part 10, right? There's 10.
Yeah,
now.
There's like 6 more parts.
Okay, because this tells you I was doing this today. No,
I haven't put them all in yet. Like,
okay,
they're still coming. So yeah.
Yeah, I just, when Andy said there's 9 at the beginning, I was like, oh my God, what did I just read all afternoon? But no, I cause that was the first one that came up on your homepage, but I also, just because I've spent so much time living in Seattle over the past decade, like a lot of the mobile stuff and the Space Needle and all that stuff, like I was like, oh yeah, see that. And like another thing that I hope we can talk about at some point today, that I just felt like it was such a recurring theme and has kind of been on my mind, is just like the ritual thing. Just how ritualistic so much of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and all of it. And I don't know, I've always kind of felt like, like black pilled people will say, like they always tell you what they're gonna do before they do it, like that's part of the ritual or whatever. Because I think Kenny was saying, right, like about how casual they are in some of these clips, like these elite drivers, they're totally like open, like they just talk about this shit and put it in the fucking tent. Like, are you serious? So I mean, maybe at some point I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of just that, and is that like, I don't know, like it's such a weird like perversion of, I don't want to say the sacred, because then it's, I don't know, but yeah, just like the ritualistic things, and especially with, I know Andy, you mentioned like the stuff with the royal family, like a lot of that stuff is, yeah, I've been thinking about that as well. Watching, I just had my mom here. My mom's British, and she watched the whole Jubilee thing and the hologram, and I mean, I think a lot of people, I don't know, I mean, my Twitter is probably not an accurate like representation of the general public, but a lot of people found the hologram creepy, or at least like sort of cringe and weird. But there were a lot of people there cheering for it, right? And same thing when she, lights up the forest lights or whatever, right? And then, yeah, you were writing about the chakras like moving up the tree, and it's like this weird skewed thing. And she's like half conscious. I mean, she's so, like, I don't even know. Is that really her? Yeah. Is it a hologram? Is it a stunt double? I don't know. It's just, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I would love to talk about the ritualistic thing at some point if people are interested. But those are some of my kind of first impressions.
I mean, you guys have known me like from the beginning, right? Like when I was just a school person, right? So like the scope keeps getting wider, and literally, I mean, there are many people who come in from like the truther side of the esoterics or different things. And like, I wasn't that, but the more you actually look at it, you can't ignore like these folks, like, they feel like they've got stuff going on in these other dimensionalities. And it's quite interesting for me, specifically in California, because Nicholas Berggruen, he has this thing called the Berggruen Institute. He literally wants to build a monastery of scholars on the top of the Santa Monica Mountains. Okay. And so like I have a map in one of the spaces originally, just like, cause I'm the cultural landscape person. So I'm like, how does this lay out? Right. And you've got UCLA and the first ARPA node, like going up to SRI. And then like, right up the hill, you've got where he wants to put his monastery, which isn't there yet. And then you track the bottom of Hertzberg, district. And then you've got Disney, and then you keep going over, and then you've got Caltech, and you've got, is it the San Gabriel Monastery, and you've got, and then JPAL, and so it's this trajectory. And then, there's other things like in that corridor, but they're really not, like, literally you could drive from one to the other in like 45 minutes. And so the thing about Berggruen is he was a financier. His father was a curator in San Francisco in the 30s. He had an affair with Frida Kahlo. So that loops back to our other whole series on Diego Rivera. But like when he retired from his finance career, he decided he wanted to become a philosopher king. And so he sold all of his possessions. This is the story in many, many articles, like in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and became the homeless billionaire. Like that's his constructed persona, was the homeless billionaire. And so he just lived out of his luxury jet, his private jet, and luxury hotels. until he's like settled back in Los Angeles. So like how lucky for California that he came back. But he said he wanted to study philosophy, and there were two UCLA professors, and I can't remember the second one, but the one, his name is Brian Copenhaver, and Brian Copenhaver, his focus is early modern European magic. Like that's his specialty. And like, I mean, it's not fringe, like, you know, he's on there like on philosophy podcast talking about metaphysics and the Hermetica. And so you've got this guy who has access to all these resources, and he's very interested in studying this, and he's actually very interested in like Confucianism. And so they have a lot of stuff going on in China too. So there are these like extra dimensionalities and stuff that's grounded in, you know, like mathematics and these other things that I think regular people are not supposed to think are serious, but the people who are doing it are pretty serious about it. So, you know, in the Berggruen Institute, like part of the reason I wanted to do the eugenics was that they had 4 main focus areas. One was to redesign democracy. So redesigning democracy, redesigning capitalism, and then transforming what it means to be human. And then the fourth one was this 21st Century Council, which was essentially like a mini World Economic Forum. But, you know, they've been working on it for 10 years, and they're meeting with all, like they have about 20 former heads of state. They've had like half a dozen meetings in China with Xi Jinping. And, you know, these are connected folks. These are very well connected people. So, yeah, when they talk about transforming the human, and they're working in metaphysics, and then they have access to like high level nanotechnology and theoretical physics, you got to kind of take them seriously. You know, like we should all be like serious people should be asking about the power dynamic. So yeah, the ritual is.
Yeah, not just on the ritual stuff, like, you know, like on of course there are multiple layers to how these people understand, but at least from the way I see how humanity and our history, or what I understand, is that from listening or their practices of ritualistic stuff, even just like Apple, right, creating this mega church,
Yeah.
you know, and like people going crazy and waiting for the last Apple, waiting for the, you know, like the conference, you know, to announce the new thing. You know, like on a basic level, they understand humans. They understand how we operate, how we've operated historically.
Yeah.
And, you know, and they nudge these things in order to get masses of people to participate willingly. You know, in these ritualistic aspects, and that also speaks to what Jessica was asking about or commenting on in terms of this notion, because I hear it in kids, and I was that person too, like, oh, what's the next thing? You know, what's the next thing, you know, to improve our lives, to make things better. And so, you know, the ritual is, at least from how I perceive it, it's part of, you know, making us follow this trajectory of expecting better improvement. And, you know, like, this is not good enough, you know, and so it's scary, because they know how humans operate, and they know how to manipulate masses, obviously. And we've experienced it over the last 2 years. And that was the biggest lesson I had personally because it's scary to be standing outside of it,
Mm-hmm.
and see how efficient it is, and how many lies I accepted, how much distortion is also dismissed, and how anyone who challenges, just like in any good religion, you know, they have mechanisms to push people who challenge the mainstream narrative. You know, they have mechanisms to dismiss you as conspirational or anti-human or anti-science, you know, weaponizing the very things we're trying to defend against us, you know, or people who stand outside of these systems. And so again, the ritual part is so like essential in order to convince people and be part of it, to me.
Yeah, and for me, I had a lot of thoughts while I was reading some of this stuff. I got through 1 through 7, and I didn't realize it's longer than 9. So you're going to have more added on after this. So, folks, you better start now if you're going to try to catch up to this. So,
I think you should make it into a book, Allison, because one of the other, sorry to interrupt you, Angel, really quick, but like it's it's really hard to take in that level of detail through a screen, for me anyway. Like, I wish I had it, like, I don't know, and even in just like pamphlet form or something. I wish my ink wasn't so expensive.
The part you lose, though, are some of the clips, which I do think we are going to, I think each of us has some clips that, or at least one clip that we want to show from it, because I do think each clip has so many nuggets of really evilness and humor in some ways, but insanity, but fear. It creates fear for me when I watch some of those things, and anger. But so we're going to get to that. But I think the question, first off, the thing that comes up for me first actually is, Allison, you mentioned you had a teacher who was like, I want to stop this communist plot, right? I want to stop this thing. And honestly, I'm glad to hear that. And as a person who identifies as a communist, and Kenny does as well, I'm fine with that guy saying that, because what he wants to do is he wants to stop this. He might think it's communist, but the first thing you got to do is say you have to stop it. Whether you think it's capitalist, whether you think it's communist, this thing's going to have to be stopped. And that is the feature that I think is most important, that I would want to work with people around, because I also understand why he thinks it's a communist plot. Because one, you have, so-called former communist nations, and Cuba is injecting more of its children right now with vaccines than any of the places around, and Cuba's not running the show here, folks. But again, the role that socialists and the left has played in this, I'm just going to say, I have to say, I can understand why you think you're fighting a communist plot when you see China doing what they're doing and things like that. So
just to clarify, this particular chunk was about, it mentioned Goldman Sachs. So it's like, if you want to try to convince me that Goldman Sachs is communist, like, that's that, just to be, it wasn't actually anything that had to do with the, I'm like, there's a fundamental misunderstanding. But
for me, I understand how people, they come back around and they do that math a different way, because they kind of think that all these folks are in it together, and they think that they're trying to take our free capitalism away from us and turning it into a communist collective. Well, you'll have nothing and like it kind of thing. Anyway, that's not really the most important point. The important point for me is the starting point is stopping this. And I do think if communism has anything to offer, if Marx has anything to offer this, we are going to have to prove it in this season that there is something we can offer in solving this problem, because the people who say they were Marxist have discredited this themselves. But I do want to also go back to what Kenny was saying, because I think Kenny and I had a similar question. Like, everything I was seeing from this kept on being these salesmen or saleswomen who were selling this stuff. And I kept looking and saying, these people over and over again are telling me technology is going to solve the problem. Technology is going to solve the problem. And that's what they were doing over and over again. And it brought me back to our last episodes that Kenny and I were doing, looking at the Communist Manifesto. And Marx is talking about machines, the production of machines, and how machines are displacing humans in the process under capitalism. That is part of how capitalism works. Yeah. And in doing so, it actually produces a crisis. And in order to get out of that crisis, the capitalist has to produce more machines. But the machines themselves, the ever increasing part of capital that relies on technology and machinery to create profit, is the actual source of its ever impending crisis. So everything they try to do has within it, it's the seeds of its own ruin. And so that's what I see these people doing here. Basically, they're taking the very same game that has got us to this point and saying, we're gonna kick it up a notch. We're going to now actually turn humans into machines. We're going to turn your data and things of your identity into widgets that can actually run things. We're going to take you out of the equation, and we're just going to make the whole thing a machine run thing. And that, I
think they actually want to put the machines in you. I mean, I think that I do increasingly feel like that there's a computational element in this, which is really crazy to think about.
Yeah. But that's what cyborg ultimately means, is that the division line between where you are yourself and where you are on a piece of equipment and a tool, you are increasingly going to be squeezed out. So more and more you becomes a tool rather than anything that's actually human. And as you can notice in all these little videos, people kept on saying, what is human? It's so confusing. And I'm like, anyway, I'll get to that. But I can now draw when I think about the push for this, it still feels like it's the drive for profits. It still feels Like these are under conditions of deep crisis. And so the very same thing that got us into that COVID nightmare that pushed this last thing is the very same thing that, to me, gets us to Ukraine and Russia and United States and NATO. And it's the same crisis. It's the same push for profits, which for me is the same thing that's pushing CRISPR into building new humans. And this was an article I found just looking up. I'll take this one. Hold on. This was in 2019. Cyborg warriors could be here by 2050. And this was the Department of Defense talking about CRISPR technology and how, this is in 2019 again, an article, and they're talking about how the future warriors by 2050 are going to be ocular enhancements to image, sight, and situational awareness, restoration and program muscular control through optogenetic bodysuit sensor webs, auditory enhancement for communication and protection, direct neural enhancement for human brain for two-way data transfer. And they say this technology is predicted to facilitate read-write capabilities between humans and machines and between humans through brain-to-brain interactions. And they note in this that this technology is going to be kind of hard to sell, but it is inevitable. And when I see things like this, and when I see, like, just the other day, the guy from the newest UK general came out and said to their own troops, the UK army has to tell its soldiers to prepare for a potential World War III, and saying, you 50,000 troops, understand we're going to have more of you, and you need to prepare to be on the theater in Europe. And then Russia responds and basically says, you know what, UK, if that happens, if there's a World War III, UK will cease to exist, Britain will vanish. And he himself says, where are you people going to live? And so when I see stuff like this to me is the context under which we are watching. On one strand, you see these people trying to dig themselves out of this giant hole that they've created for us using technology. And at the same strand, they're prepared, and they are preparing to literally destroy the whole kit and caboodle, right? And I believe that both those things are going to be in operation right now. This whole mythical idea of creation with this tree and things like that, to me, that feels like kind of the fever dreams of Rasputin during World War I in Russia, like just people believing that this is how they're going to get themselves out of these problems. But Allison, I do believe you're right. They should not, these visions they have should be taken seriously, because these people, they're not credible in terms of believing that they have a solution, but they are credible in saying they will enact what they think is the solution. And it will be, I believe it's going to be the end of humanity one way or another, unless we stop it. So those were the things that came up for me in looking at this. Is it reinforced for me that the stakes are humanity here.
Should we watch the What is a Human clip? That was one of the ones that I pulled, and I feel like it relates to a lot of what you just said.
That was that
T-O-A. Okay. Yeah, Tobias Reese.
Tobias, that jackass. I couldn't stand that guy.
Okay, I think I have it right here.
He's in Berkeley.
Oh, no wonder.
Alma mater.
Oh my God. Okay, should I play it, Andy? Oh, I have to screen share.
You got a screen share, yeah.
So what is the human? Sounds like a funny question, like a huge and giant and big question. But the way in which we have answered these questions, or this question, what is a human being, seems to be outdated. So historically, we in the modern West have basically assumed that the concept of the human is stabilized by two differentiations, that humans are more than mere nature, that we're set apart from animals and plants on the one hand, and then we are other or different from mere machines on the other side. So on the one side is the human, on the other side are animals and machines. The criterion of differentiation for this was that we humans have what animals and machines don't have, namely we have intelligence, machines have mechanics, and animals have just instinct, so they're kind of enclosed. So this leads to a funny set of binaries or little couples where humans are intelligence, machines have instinct and mechanisms. Humans are free, we're not bound by instinct and mechanism, while animals and machines have necessity. We are subjects in a world composed of objects. We're thinking things in a world of mere things. If you think about the university, you see that there is a faculty of arts, which is concerned with the human only. And in fact, it's concerned with the human insofar as it cannot be explained in terms of the natural sciences or engineering. It's this idea of the more and the other. And you have the faculty of science or engineering, which is concerned with everything else in the world, from, squids in the ocean to the formation of clouds, to global weather systems, to rockets, to single-cell organisms and minimally viable microbes, to termites. So we think that today, and that's the basic idea basic observation from which the transformations of the human program starts, today all of these distinctions, or these two differentiations, that we're more than nature and other than machine, fail. I list microbiome because no one quite knows where a human being ends and its microbiome begins. The microbiome would be the number total of the microbes that live in and on your body. So, for example, most of the neurochemicals that we find in our brain, the brain that makes us, so to speak, are actually produced by bacteria living in our gut, which is a very funny idea. Or synthetic biology, we'll talk a lot about this. The organisms that synthetic biology produces don't exist in nature, but they're perfectly natural, as if the distinction between nature and technology or nature and art doesn't quite hold. We're, by any measure, not the only things in the universe that are intelligent. Animal intelligence research has sort of undermined this, and machines think today too and learn and have intelligence. So it's as if the vocabulary, the logic of the human that is implicit in the vocabulary that we have to think about ourselves as human, to experience ourselves as human, to make sense of ourselves as human, doesn't work anymore. There are technical and scientific possibilities that have outgrown them. So we humans appear to be neither more than nature nor other than machine. And so the question is, what is the human? What is it that defines us now? So we designed the transformations of the human program as an effort to place philosophers and artists in science labs or in conversations with scientists in biology, but also in artificial intelligence, so that they together collectively study the understanding of the human or of the world that emerges from AI research, for example, or from biotech research, so that this is not an abstract, arbitrary question, what is the human, and everyone has a feeling or an opinion about it, but that we actually make science and technology visible as unfolding philosophical events.
That's very irritating. Jessica, go ahead. And what were your thoughts on that? And well, I want everyone to share what they think about that. Cool.
So that's all. I mean, I don't know. Like, I get he's trying to debunk the, the whole more than human, just the anthropocentrism, but his framing doesn't get any less anthropocentric, and in fact it gets more. I mean, humans are animals. First of all, we are, and that's great. Animals are beautiful, amazing. And I don't know, that the whole framing of the definition of the word is outdated. That to me is such an academic impulse. And I've just been reading about the documentary that's just come out called What is a Woman, which is about a different though related set of issues. But I think it's the same impulse to complicate something that's not complicated. Everybody knows what a human is. Everybody knows what a woman is. I don't know. It just, yeah. I mean, obviously there's all sorts of directions in terms of the consequences of what he's saying when it's actually applied. But my irritation is just most immediately in that sort of academic anthropocentric framing, which I just constantly see being.
Brings me back a little bit to a conversation that we had with John Kleisek, where he talks about how I guess when we're trying to define things, it takes the essence of things away, and yeah, I mean I think that's what I think this is a product in a way of Western culture, capitalism, and Western science understanding, because there is different definitions or understandings of the depth of what humans is too, and depending on different cultures, depending on your environment, your context, and so, like, it is pointless to me, like I said, like it also in a way doesn't matter, like to me what other people think it's human. It's like, what is it to me, like what do I experience? But I think that in this process of creating all this bullshit, all this technology, is the homogenizing force. There is a homogenizing force of telling everyone around the world, this is what this is, and this is what you should be, and this is how we improve you, and this is what's wrong with you,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I think, that school of thought, that vision of the world, that understanding or trying to explain, humanity, it's about, and ultimately, to me, it's like, it goes back to exploitation, because that's why you want to categorize things, because if you don't, you would just let them be. They just exist, and at least that's just how I see it.
I think too, like disassociation, and like the way that he's framing, and all of these people are framing, like what would be like fulfilling, it's like, to me, like based on my lived experience, right, like the most fulfilling moments and experiences of being human, right, are when we fully like accept reality, not necessarily in like a super hyper secular way, right, but like accepting your body, right, like accepting, oh my gosh, like I'm a female human mammal, whatever, right, like these really, like embodied experiences, right, dance for some people, or human touch, right, a mother breastfeeding her baby, like these like full embodiments of like what it actually is materially and also spiritually, to be human, which is I guess like the ritual, thinking more about that, it's like we are super ritualistic beings, I think, innately, and so that's maybe why it works, their sort of capture of that, but so there's like fulfillment that way, but the way they're framing fulfillment is like a complete disassociation from that. It's like fulfillment would be like transcending that human embodiment and that human experience, like to make it bigger or better or augmented, right, in some way. So to me, it just seems like mutually exclusive sort of pathway is like toward fulfillment, and I think the latter is obviously a false promise, as if you've ever read Frankenstein or like any book ever written, right, in the sort of genre of dystopian literature, then that.
Yeah, and I'm so irritated by people like this, and by this whole scene in front of me. These people, this is academia. This is the egoism of academia. But I recognize that these people they're not really the face of what we're facing. They're the front men for it. Behind them is Pompeo. Behind them is the CIA. Behind them is the state. Behind them are people who in corporations whose calculations have nothing to do with artists or engineers or humanity. Has nothing to do with that. Their calculations are. But here's the front man for us right here, and he's such a fucking huckster, because his first thing when he talks about humanity is humanity. Are we machines? Well, we're not machines. We're not animals or in nature either. I was like, wait, when did you write me out of that? How, when you started this argument, when you little fucking philosopher fake, when you started this discussion, how did you write out the theory, the idea that some of us actually think we're part of nature? Like, there are some of us who believe that. Actually, there's a lot of people who believe that. You just literally wrote that out of the entire discussion, because that's not that it couldn't be a starting point, but he's not going to allow it to be a starting point, because he's trying to sell something. And what he's trying to sell is this AI biotech project, which is, I do believe, like Allison points to it all the time, Why is the Department of Energy involved in this? Why is the Department of Defense involved in this? Why do we keep seeing these much more pernicious entities and institutions deeply involved in all these sorts of things? And this guy's, not only is he trying to smooth talk it in front of us and leave out a whole, like, pretending to be a philosopher, but leaving out the idea of, wait, do you know there's a possibility that humans are just part of nature? And you're trying to strip us from that right now because you left that out of the whole discussion. But secondly, what you're trying to soft sell here at the end is, oh, we're going to have artists looking at this. We're going to have scientists looking at this. They're going to be those people. First of all, I wouldn't want them looking at it. I don't trust those people. But secondly, they're not going to decide how this goes. It's not going to be an artist deciding how this goes. It's not going to be some well-meaning scientist even. And frankly, even if they, at this point, I wouldn't trust any of those people anyway. But he's trying to tell us in his little language that you're going to be safe because we have people who care about humanity looking at this. And it's just, I get so angry looking at the fact that his shoes, the color of his shoes match his sweater. And it's just, and that woman, it looks like she just looks sinister to me, the way she's sitting there in that chair. It's very irritating and very upsetting when I see this kind of stuff because it's all through it. My clip is going to be a version of what you've shown us here.
Just one little comment, I guess, like my partner a while back, made a comment about San Francisco, right? Because there's this like hyper focus on all this worldview, like designing, improving, quote unquote, and or equality and democratizing all these, cliche topics. But she said, like San Francisco is full of robots. So I asked whether these people are themselves humans, and because like I do think there is something that's like misguided and out of touch with what at least my sense of humanity is, which is aligned to what Libs was saying. I do see the world. We are part of nature. We didn't come into nature to conquer nature. We're part of the ecosystem, and that means the world. That means everything, but these people are so far removed from that understanding, so they think it's okay to just design, tinker with, and oblivious to the repercussions of things that have taken, millions and billions of years, to happen, and they think they can, just measure it and get it right, right away, and it will be happy, in that democracy and improved humans.
So Allison, go ahead, because you found some of these gems. So what were your thoughts, and what are some things that come up for you as you?
I just want to point out that this guy is like one of the second in command to Berggruen, who's at the arm of the California Trust Framework legislators. So, it's not that far off. Like when they need to neuroengineer you, it's going to be on your blockchain electronic health record. And that's something that Hertzberg doesn't talk about at all. The one thing that I think is important to understand is these folks are now, they're narrative shaping. So they're testing out the storylines to make things acceptable. And that's why, again, you've talked about bringing in the humanities folks, bringing in the artists, like they're there to sort of do some A/B testing of like the storyline. And if you look at it that way, it's helpful because you can see how they're planning to pitch it. And so a lot of the essentially what they're trying to frame is biology as technology. They're like, look, we caused all of this harm with these petrochemicals, right? So much true. So now they're going to reframe synthetic biology and gene editing and, bioreactor fermenter things as local and organic. And so because it uses molecules, somehow all of this is now an organic technology. And so we should be more accepting because it's the new paradigm. And it's not going to be global supply chains. We're just going to do synthetic biology like mushroom fabric here in your local community, and have the robots like, plan out the shoes and all the stuff made out of the CRISPR mushroom stuff. And so the narrative is being laid out. And I think that's important. And the other piece that it goes along with a few other papers that I included in some of the write-ups, but they're literally working on bidirectional, like, energetic systems where they literally look at life, like biochemical life. How do they describe it? As like is it assay? Is that how you say it?
Assay, yeah.
Assay for digital communication. So someone out there has reimagined that with an appropriate oracle of a biosensor, our livingness in the world can communicate information about what it is to live in the world into a digital space.
Yeah.
And they're really working hard on that. And then increasingly, like, they even have use cases right now, like improved fertilizers where they're doing, synthetic biology where they can remotely activate genes. And again, it's framed as organic, better than nitrogen, right? Like, we've got these molecules in the soil and we can just turn them on at the right time, like remotely. And you've got James Giordano, the neurohacking guy out there saying, wow, this could go all sorts of ways wrong. And we don't have even any policies in place to protect people from this, like this remote operation stuff, neurohacking. And so literally, and it was sort of touched on in that article with the military and collective hive minds, they're imagining a future where, like, our material selves have no boundaries. Like, I mean, you talk about, like, in social settings, people not having good boundaries, but they literally don't want our bodies, our minds to have physical boundaries anymore. And that we will, like, plug and unplug with other consciousnesses. And some of those consciousnesses we currently may not identify as living things. It's going so far out. And yet we haven't had these philosophical conversations, and then they're going to have them for us, at the Berkeley National Laboratory with the Department of Energy people. They're going to have the conversation and to tell us how it's going to go. So to me, that's a bit shocking. And then just the idea of, like, capitalism, like, these markets are built on inadequacy, right? Like, your body doesn't work right. You're not the right shape. This is not functional. Your hair could be better. Actually, your carpet is a little stinky. Like, every single thing there's a problem so that they can sell you the fix. And that was always that way. But now we're to the point of literally talking about, like, bio-nano hack, like, where does that go? And to me, I don't know if any of you ever read that book, M.T. Anderson's Feed. It's like a young adult novel. It's really worthwhile. Like, it's sort of an epistolary kind of framework, but it's set in this near future dystopia. And people have a feed. They're connected to the feed. And, like, the young girls literally, like, multiple times a day, there will be the new trend of how your body is supposed to be. Like, and it gets into bizarre things like cutting with little eyeballs in it and, like, things like, but it's so it's so brutal. Like, it's multiple times a day you have to change your body. And I can see it. Like, this book is at least 10 or 15 years old, but knowing the mental health issues right now for young people, like, I can't even imagine how we're going to navigate that without telling them, like, you're okay. We love you. You're part of nature. We're all the way we're supposed to be. Variety's good, I don't know. That's what.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, go ahead.
Jessica, were you going to say something?
I was just going to make a quick little comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I always say it's quick and then it's no, I just did a tiny anecdote just because I've been traveling recently, and you do like 10 times more people watching when you're like sitting on a plane or whatever, especially when you live in the middle of nowhere. But there was this girl in front of me on one of the plane rides, and she, when they, like, whatever, the intercom pilot says, like, okay, you can turn your devices on or whatever. And she was on, I think, Instagram or, like, some social media. And, like, I've been on Instagram, like, I've definitely done, like, scrolling to an unhealthy level at many points, in my life, whatever. But I was just watching her and just the pace at which she was the thing about the feed, and it's like a literal social media feed, like, just literally just scrolling and then into the story and then like onto the next. And I was like actually really disturbed, because even if I'm like, doing something like that, like she was going like 50 times faster than I would go, even if I'm sort of on autopilot. And it just, I don't know, hearing you, talk about sort of like the mental health and stuff, like I feel like that's just like a little microcosm of like, literally like, okay, I have to switch to this thing and then change this, and here's this trend, and then it's Father's Day, and so-and-so's having a baby, and these body types. And it was like watching a robot. I mean, literally, it was so weird. And she was like, a young girl.
So I agree with Allison, what you were saying about the thing that this is narrative shaping, and they're testing. It's not just testing out the technologies; they're testing out the narrative that they're going to use to pitch this. Because in that Department of Defense article was like, this is not going to be an easy sell, but this is the sell we got to make, because we have to get there. The trick of saying that this is all biological now, we're using natural things, like even CRISPR, that's a lie. Because, well, let me say it this way. We've all been hearing about mRNA as in this so-called vaccine, this thing. It's not mRNA. mRNA is a natural product of humans. It's synthetic mRNA. It doesn't degrade. The reason they don't use normal mRNA is normal mRNA degrades inside the body. This mRNA that is being injected into people is synthetic mRNA. It doesn't degrade. It sits there like a plastic log inside your body. And secondly, even CRISPR, which is based on real biological Cas9 molecules that are found in bacteria that are used by it, the complex that is put inside of people is not natural. It is actually very unnatural, and it's still a tool. Like if you take the hide off the animal and use it as a tent or clothing, it's now a tool, and it's no longer it might be natural, but it's you're now using as a tool. Same with taking the bones of something and using the bones to cut something, or using the bones to make the tips of arrows. Those are tools. And that's the trick. This little game they're trying to play and trying to say, oh, these things are just natural. No, you're not. You're taking pieces of the natural world and you're turning them into machines, and you're using them. I would say you're using them against us and the rest of the natural world. But it is a very interesting game that they're playing with language and with materials and with our own ignorance about what they're doing.
Well, I'll say, I mean, the first article that I wrote, just sort of situating this, went back to March when we were in Salt Lake City at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference. And, it was at the Brigham Academy, which was the first, founded by Brigham Young, and now it's the Provo Library. And they had, it's quite a big room, 150 people, a couple hundred people. And they had a big banner up, and it said the banner, it was quite interesting because it was sort of a skyline with a bit of nature. And it had two planes going across with like strong trails coming out the back end. And then the line said, "What will you create?" Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the framing, is like, what will you create? Now, this conference was particularly focused on blockchain. But again, within the word spells, like in how they, that's part of the ritual, I think, is imprinting, is they frame the narrative, right? You're a creator. This is the creative economy. Come on, guys. It's the creative economy. Aren't we all creative here? Creativity is good. We're supposed to be creative. Now it's with molecules. Okay, so it's with molecules, but it's organic, and you can just see how they're leading everybody along. It's like, well, and knowing how the narrative has been weaponized over the past 2 years, all of the tropes, you can sort of see emerging what the new tropes will be, right? But it's organic. We need it to save the planet. And that's how it rolls in. And I don't know how to stop it, because I have to say, like, even the people who were presented, who were these, won these fellowships, right, to go do this work, like, I had empathy for them, because I don't think that these were people who would go into it intentionally for harmful reasons. Like, as the parent of a young adult person, Like if your kid like got to school and they got a nice fellowship, and you would be proud of them, right? And then they would be proud that they got this fellowship, and hey, they're doing humanities and they're fixing the world, right? And they just seem so. It's this guy Gabriel Corin. And then there was this other young woman, and I'm like, as a parent, I kind of felt for them because I'm like, I don't want a world where to succeed you have to go do that job. You know, because literally it's like they're workers, right? They're intellectual workers. I mean, you guys have been navigating that terrain of academic work. It sucks, right? Like to try to do like your gift and then navigate this world. Like we should do better so that people can do that and not have to be a front for bioreactors and like put a happy face on it. Like they didn't seem to be loving doing that. They were going to give it the college try. But that's not the world that we should build. I mean, in my opinion, like but if we're going to try to route this, we don't have a lot of time to say it. Like now's the time to say it. And I feel like, again, within this weaponized narrative crucible, you know, and I don't do this just because I want to have some big name, but like, I'm trying to have a different conversation. And so many of the conversations that suck up all the oxygen aren't these exactly, or they're a version of these conversations, but I don't know that the context or the setting is something that could actually bring people together. So over the long term anyway.
I just wanted to comment on what Allison said.
Okay.
Because I actually, feel similarly that, there's a lot of people who they are trying to do, good. And I personally have friends who are in ed tech nonprofits, and they think they're on the right side, and it is hard to even get started with a conversation. And I personally think it's a big issue is this reverence of institutionalized education. Because this is the churches where they go to get initiated into this frame of the world, and so challenging that frame of the world, then I'm the enemy, because I'm destroying what they were taught, in reframing. Like I personally, had to rebuild my understanding of the world a few times. I was completely liberal, voter. I was all about Obama. I went to his inauguration in 2008. My friend was in Congress at the time, but that also in turn is what showed me the trash that's behind all that. That like the whole high school feeling, around the ball, the inauguration balls, and like who has a ticket to what, and and but I guess just going back to my friends, like they mean well, and they also have to make a living, and it also makes me think of the people at the border, right? Like like people from like immigrant backgrounds who become ICE agents, right? It makes me think of the industries of, like the carceral industries, right? There are entire communities that depend on that. And, it makes me think of the coal miners that Hillary Clinton just called them deplorables, and so how then, like, and you will defend your livelihood, and you will justify your livelihood. That's kind of a human thing, and so how do we get out of that, and like all these things that we're talking about is here are important, and they're daunting, just like Jessica said earlier, and they're hard. Like my partner is like, she actually gets a little anxious when we have a conversation here because she has a hard time following. She's asking to simplify, and but it's hard, right? Because like you do have to kind of dig in, and there's no other way around, to kind of understand the implications of things. And so I guess that is the human element in all this, that it is complicated to talk to someone who thinks they're doing well because they've been taught that that's doing well. And at least for me, like at least my mission is to destroy the reverence of institutionalized education. Like, yeah, sure, you have some sort of angle, and you've learned a particular frame of analyzing the world. Doesn't make you fucking right or the authority on this. My mother can give you fucking lessons on, ecology and, environmentalism, because she can make a fucking meal out of nothing, from the fridge. So I don't give a shit that you have a college degree. There is people who can teach you something, because they live humanity. They don't go to learn theoretical shit. And humanity is complicated, just like democracy is complicated. But if you want to live in this tidy world that, like, the fucking communities that they're creating in San Francisco, like the newly designed parts of the city where there are literal robots patrolling the parking lots of Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco. There are designed cities, supposedly designed for better living. If that's the fucking world you are living, if you don't want to accept all the, the imperfections that comes with nature, like, that to me is where the line is. Like, so it takes a bit of bringing down the people who think they're authorities, but also elevate the people who don't think they have a voice because they've been told your opinions don't matter because you didn't go to school. So at least that's for me where, that's the gap that needs to be bridged, because, like, all these technical terms, the concept needs to be understood, because you have to understand implications. There's no way to get around it, around some certain difficult topics. But to me is that, reverence, again, of institutionalized people and the reliance on experts. No, be your own fucking intellectual, have an opinion, be wrong. And like, we all have to pitch in to stop this shit. And I think in the process of elevating people that have been told that they're not experts, in the process of them elevating themselves, we can create something new. But as long as we keep relying on experts, then we get this bullshit, these salesmen, that will lie because they are part of the system, that they will test narratives on us, right, to convince us that they know better than we do.
It's beautiful.
Jessica, you want to weigh in on some of the stuff that they've said?
I just feel like amen to everything you said. If you got something, go for it, Andy.
I think the only thing I struggle with this because I've never been comfortable with the people here in San Francisco or in the Bay Area. Like, I always felt like an outsider, as somebody from the Midwest, from a different background. And so I've always been suspicious of the arrogance that I see in this town, and felt something that there was something deceptive, that was deceitful in it, and mean in it. So I don't know if I have that same response that Allison and Kenny have of feeling sorry for these people. I kind of think when there's a lot of talk about Nazis and fascism these days. Everyone wants to talk about Nazis and fascism, but there was Hitler and Goebbels and stuff like that. But then there were the ground troops for that kind of stuff, and they had brown shirts. That's what these people look like to me. They seem like brown shirts to me. They sometimes are a little more diverse, but these are the authors of telling us. These are the salespeople who are going to tell us that more technology is going to make our lives better, when we all know the simple message is the very process that got us into this problem, they're pushing it harder. And then, as Allison pointed out later in an article, now they're going to say, oh, but we're going to revitalize democracy as well. The very thing that they've used to strip away democracy, to build tyranny, now these people are telling us they're going to build democracy. It's very hard for me to see these people as even allies in the future. So if that's possible, that's great. That's why the guy who said, I'm an anti-communist who wants to stop this, that's my ally. Because all you have to know is that this has to be stopped. And I personally don't think it's that difficult to say to somebody, the very people who lied to you about where all this machinery was going to take you are now going to bring you more machinery. They're going to try to make you a machine in order to solve our problems. What do you think about that? Let's do it, huh? It's like, no, that's the simple message. And your mom would get it, Kenny. And most people would get that. but we are also being separated at the very same time. So,
but I would say, I mean, my research into impact finance, that's grounded in capital. Like, and it's not an ism. I'm not saying like one side or the other, but the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
The placing bets on managed human behavior, and there's a paternalism to it, right? Like that's going to come along. And the people who would be asserting this paternalism would be, in my opinion, probably the same class of people who were the social workers and healthcare providers who administered institutionalized mass sterilization. And without question, right? These were the experts that Kenny's talking about. So like we know what's good for you. We know what wellness behaviors are going to work for you. We know what nutrition is good for you. We know, and all of that's going to come with this emerging technology, right? And so it actually does matter to me that people understand the basic mechanics. Like this has to happen because there's a wave of capital that is real estate is not big enough anymore. Mortgage debt isn't big enough. You have to become the debt. And if that piece isn't understood, I find the whole thing, like people are not getting it, right? And it's going to cross housing. It's going to be healthcare. It's going to be education. It's going to be food. It's going to be the judicial system. Like there's no aspect to the lives of anyone who's on the verge of dispossession that isn't going to be touched by that. But it's not communist here. Like, I'm not saying that other countries don't have their own things going on, but here it literally is about understanding the finance. And if we don't know where to situate the power, like where to look, I don't find that just I'm angry about this. Like it's going to help us focus. I mean, once we know and we realize it's Google and Mark Benioff and all of these jokers, like I don't know that I have a much better strategy, but like we need to understand it's them. And I don't know, maybe those people would just call those people communists. I don't know. Like, but it literally is about like, we have to package you as debt. And then to me, that's where if we backed all the way up to the mission system, right? If we backed all the way up into who is worthy, who is not, who is saved, who is not, who is compliant, who is not, who is natural, who is not. And it's bound up in indebtedness, like spiritual indebtedness, financial indebtedness. Then it feels like accessible in a different way. I guess that's what I was trying to get into with the mission system a bit, is that on the one hand, yes, you have these complex debt structured products and the Mark Andreessens and the blockchain and the staking and all of this stuff, but you could just sort of tie it all the way back down to these tithing and these feudal systems. Like there is I feel like that there is a through line.
I was just thinking all of a sudden about the Sherwood Forest part of your series, just thinking about capital and like this, I mean, holy hellfire, so bizarre, like this 5G forest, but like Robin Hood, right? That dude, right? It's like the whole myth is about steal from the rich, give to the poor. Like it's about class, like wealth redistribution and class warfare.
Maybe he was really an impact investor.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, you have to understand though, I spent at least 2 decades around people who said they who said they were anti-capitalist on the basis of calling themselves communists, and they expose themselves as complete frauds. And so yeah. I don't believe in what people say. I believe in what people do. And so if a person says, I will set my back against what's happening, if they want to call what they're saying right now, if they want to call that communism, I'm with them. Like, of course, we're going to have that discussion, because really the discussion is had while we try to stop it, while we try to put our bodies in the way of this thing and our minds against it. Because really, that to me is where people are going to learn what's this really about. And frankly, where I myself will learn, I do think this is about capitalism. I do think that socialist revolution, as Marx described it, has something to say about where we might need to go. It doesn't answer what that's going to look like, because I think Marx thought it meant taking the means of production and using them. I'm more of the mind that that's going to have to go as well, like the way the Luddites kind of looked at it. That Marx is critical. Actually, he's on their side because he knows what they're angry about, but he's critical of them because he's saying they're trying to turn the wheel of history backward. And I'm like, we're going to have to turn that wheel of history backward if we're going to get control of this, because this has gone for way too far. So
can I just chime in one, like
yeah,
the complexity is that I think many people who are opposing on the basis of individual rights and free markets and crypto. And I know that is a central part of where they plan to drive this. Like these things are not disconnected. And so while I don't think that individual people who are necessarily understanding that, like, as they make their choice, but when I keep saying, there, but for the grace of God, go you, like the hungry kid, the person who is leaving prison, the unhoused person, like your family is 5 to 10 years from that. So while you feel like maybe you can separate yourself and build your wall for your family or your community, like that ethos, I think, is not going to be effective. We actually have to come at this thing in terms of preserving the collective. And I think that there's a counter to that. Like, and I'm not saying the collective in terms of an ism, but simply no one small group of people is going to somehow cut themselves off and preserve their own independence within the system. And until we feel some mutual obligation to one another in how this goes, and not just in our own country, but globally, because this is the metaverse. Like, that's what I keep saying. I'm like, this ultimately could be the unifying force of the world, like a reckoning that, no, I don't want my kid to have to put their brain in a robot and compete against your kid in the Philippines putting their brain in a robot against people in Colombia putting their brain in a robot. Like, nobody's kids should have to put their brains in robots. Can we all agree? Like, let's not do this. Like, I don't want to like put our brains in a robot so that my kid gets $2 more an hour than your kid. Like, that's a terrible paradigm. The whole thing is terrible. And so anyway, that's just where I'm at. Like, I feel like there is an intentionality in terms of triggering like an independence-minded, patriot, libertarian crypto thing, that it actually really has to be addressed. Not that those people in and of themselves individually are bad people, but that mentality, if left to progress the way they hope it to progress, will become a major problem in the not too distant future. And that's what they're selling in Texas. That's why, like, the paradigm between the California cell on blockchain and the Texas paradigm are mirror images, but both going the same place. Anyway, that's my.
Kenny, do you want to say anything about that?
Not about this.
Yeah.
I kind of, all I'll say is, and I think, I believe that sincere struggle is the way we're going to sort this out. And it will not be sorted out in the discussion. It will be sorted out in the fight. And the discussion that we're having, though, does, because Allison, everything you just said are the discussions that are actually happening right now in the prepper communities that I'm in right now, like about how much we can survive on our own. And I believe there is no individual survival. And it's even a discussion Brandy and I are having where we try to see how much we agree on what are we really prepping for? Like, are we prepping for our survival, two people, or are we prepping for our survival? And what does that mean if things get strange and stranger and we feel like there's limited resources? That discussion is going to have real meaning about how much we share with our neighbors. Why do we share with our neighbors? Our neighbors who refuse to listen to us. And we talked about this before, but now they might be open to hearing it. Like, all these sorts of things are going to be part of shaping what collective means, because unfortunately, and this is where I get back to that guy, collective has meant do what the state tells you to do. That's what's happened. And so we are going to have to find a new definition of that word that connects it to actually what it was supposed to be, which is collective action was supposed to ensure individual agency, individual expression. It was never supposed to be counterposed to it. And that's how it's been done. And that's how it's understandable that people are extremely skeptical of those of us who talk about collectivity, particularly as it gets rebranded by the World Economic Forum. to say you're not going to have shit and you're not going to like it.
And I guess I will say, yeah, like, it is scary that they're set up on both ends. Like quote unquote leftists who wants to help people line the more individualistic. It is scary. They have a win on both sides and funneling everyone into the same future. And I think that's where like we need to have these conversations, right, with everyone, like these honest conversations. And I do wanna again to recognize like what Libson is saying is like at this point it's about finding the people who want to do something about it, who see something is wrong, and making something out of that. And because that is the most fundamental thing. If you don't think anything is wrong, if you just want to go along, if you don't want to bother, then there's nothing I can do there, and yes, like also it requires a high degree of honesty, in terms of our politics, our understanding of history, right? Like just like Libson, I understand now. It took me a while. I was very dogmatic too. I was very like communism, and I would get mad. No, let's look at reality. What shit happened? Why people are afraid of communism, and rightly so. I don't want that shit. I don't want to, that collectivism dictator from the state. That's not the world I want to live in. That's not my sense of communism. In democracy and liberty and sense of individuality. And I've even had difficult conversations. I had one with Jake, in not classic Jake, Eduardo's friend, and it was a tough conversation because he comes from that more of the libertarian worldview, but yet we found commonality. We understand there are these dictations, there's these big structures that are governing our lives, and so there is commonality, and there's a sense of something has to be done. And so those are our allies, not the people who are in the system, as well-meaning as they may be, but they are unwilling to realize that there is something fundamentally nefarious and deeply wrong with the task they're executing in this machinery. And so for that reason, like I don't think I can. For me personally, it's a waste of energy to try to reach these friends that I disagree with fundamentally, but they're deep in that ed tech or in some genetic bullshit, because they will defend their church.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess the language thing is really interesting to me. Like the idea of like, do we need, or to what degree do people need to have a shared understanding of like the vocabulary that they're using in order to like wage that struggle? Because I mean, we need to be able to communicate with each other, like even just on a practical, logistics level. And the language is so powerful. I mean, that's such a massive part of the narrative shaping and the market shaping and, just getting the public kind of wound around these people's fingers. I'm a poet, writer, English professor. Like I put a lot of stock in the power of language, but I tend to agree with you, Andy. I mean, I think I said something to this effect in one of the recent episodes, but I think like that deeper conversation about what is it that we're building and how do we want to organize it, and who are there, what are the rules going to be, and what if you dissent, like that discussion is the reward that we get, if we're able to actually wage this struggle and win or whatever, I don't know, whatever winning looks like. Sorry, my dog's barking.
I do want to say one thing that I hear what you're saying, Allison, that because I do take what you're saying, Allison, as even more than just the language descriptor. You're saying, look, this is the beast that's at work here. This is what we're dealing with. And I completely agree with you that, and this is why these discussions are so helpful, because they help me reinforce what is it that I actually believe is going on, and what do I need to shed of my old illusions that will be helpful in the struggle that I'm involved in here in the Bay Area. So I don't want to I'm not dismissing it all. And in fact, I value, Allison, you staying focused on, let's remember what this is about. I am prepared to put aside right now people I'm running into, them not necessarily seeing it. But if they get that wrong, they will be fooled by our opponents. At some point, they're going to have to get that right, because our opponents are going to use the full spectrum of chicanery and illusions to draw people back into the system and get them to buy in. So that is going to have to be answered. And if what we're dealing with is this thing called capital and capitalism, we are going to all have to come to that understanding at some point in time.
But the thing is, it's already happening. I mean, in all of the different sections. And I think that's part of like the understanding of what is the struggle. So now, we've moved on from the first year of like, okay, it's about the health stuff, to people understanding, okay, it's fourth industrial revolution and the internet of bodies. Like, I think people have a pretty firm grip in economic dispossession and control. I still don't think that most of those conversations are proceeding with very broad stroke discussions of, it's the Chinese social credit system, it's the Chinese ESGs, it's the they're going to ruin all of our food supply. Without it, at least, and I'm speaking just for being here in the United States, an understanding of what it actually is, because I feel like until people can come to terms with what is the United States, like in California sort of embodies a certain component of like what the American dream is. What are we? Because we're defending a concept that I think we don't have we're not looking at it with clear eyes. And so, like, the nature of people's struggle, like how they define the struggle may be different. Like, many people may just be like, I just want my family to be okay, and I have the stuff and I have freedom to do what I want. For me, I feel like the struggle is more, how do we try to heal domination culture? Like, and I'm not going to see it in my lifetime. I'm not kidding myself that that's an easy thing. But like, until we can lay out a story in an authentic way of like, hey, like, I think the article that was the hardest for me, the research, was really looking into the radiation, like these secret military things happening during the Cold War and injecting, like, not that it's totally shocking to me, but literally, I think part of it was like, reading the appendices of the congressional hearings and saying, the University of Chicago got 56 aborted or stillborn babies that they, incinerated and tested for strontium-90. And there's a certain like harshness to that, right? Like, that is who we are. And I'm not saying other countries don't have their deep baggage and other things, and they need to deal with it wherever they are. But I guess my ambitions for this struggle are bigger than simply like beating back this thing for the moment and like carving out some space. And not everybody has the same job in this. Like, I'm not saying everybody has to do the thing I've picked up to carry to do, but yeah, it's how you define the terms of the struggle. And for me, I'm like, wow, I guess I just go bigger, but go home. Like, and again, not that I'm just trying to bash it just to bash it, or like, but I feel like we can't, until we actually look at it and see it, then like, how are we going to cure it? Like, how are we actually going to get, because it's just going to keep coming back with whatever new technology it's this domination thing is embedded in it. And I will just say, like, one of my very first article that I thought was quite fascinating was looking at the indigenous people of the Los Angeles area, and they were doing an excavation tied to some transit corridor opposite the San Gabriel mission. And the guy's like, look, there's the water wheel. They're like, this is the first vertical water wheel on the way. It was super efficient. Like, this was high technology, like New England, man. Like, the New England guy came over from Boston, and he fought the pirates, and then he joined the mission. He got the vertical water wheel, and then it was just full steam ahead for California agriculture after the vertical water wheel. And like, they're pointing to it in the trench in the, opposite the mission. And I'm thinking, like in the mission, they have like a statue to the thousands of indigenous people who died like in that mission, like many of whom were probably worked to death digging irrigation canals to feed the damn water wheel and the lemon and the orchards that were put in there and the grape, so it's the efficiency. Like, how do we get over that? The experts, the scientific management, the efficiency, the managed life. And I don't know, like, I don't find even in the like people having the internet of bodies conversation, like, I can't tell you how many people seem to like things I put out. And then like, I'll glance at their profile and like, they're literally in the biotech sector, or they work for Salesforce, or they do these things. I'm like, oh, like, do you have cognitive dissonance? Like, is there, I don't know.
That's what I was going to ask, Alison, is like, where do you have a sense of where you think that's coming from? Because I think like, I feel like so many like anti-mandate or like people in this space that I'm like subscribed to or whatever, like I feel like I've gotten emails from probably every single one of them at some point in the last year with like the subject line being like, we've won, no, we haven't, and maybe, maybe there was some small like achievement or whatever, they got a mandate dropped or whatever, but right. Like we haven't fucking won, like, come on. But do you think that comes from cognitive dissonance? Do you think that comes from like just the intensity of all this and people craving hope? Or does it come from a selfishness of like, yeah, I just want me and my family to be fine. And if we're going to be fine for our lifetime, then that's the best we can do. Or I don't know, like what? And I mean, I'm saying like, I feel like I'm hypocritical too, because I've been bashing academia for I don't know how many years now, and I'm still in it.
So I guess where I'm at now is that, we've talked about, building something, right, worth defending. And, I think that that's still true, that especially considering where the world is heading. And it has to grow, and it has to invite people who, like myself right now, I helped with the Workers and Students for Choice at the beginning, but then I can't because I'm struggling. I'm not so much, I'm still in the struggle in my own way, but I'm not directly in the struggle because I am struggling because the system is eating me alive right now, financially. Mm. And so how do we then create things that can give people a way out, from that hamster wheel? People who maybe you didn't know would agree with you or don't have the time to just get out of the hamster wheel. And I actually, I talk casually about politics. I talked to this 27-year-old Black kid from South Carolina who's new to the Bay Area. And, he's a rapper, he's an artist. And, he also dropped out of college. And he was telling me, you know what? They want us to be like robots. So he gets it. We haven't talked. We just had a casual conversation. And he gets it. He there is people who get the sense of the desperation that this system creates that we're living under. So how do we create something that will invite people that it creates again figurative politics that creates that thing that we want the world to look like. And that's the hard part, right? Because like we said, destroying is easy. I mean, that's the fucking easy part. How do you build something worth defending and full of joy and full of love and full of humanity? It's important to understand these concepts, but I think that's what makes the big difference. I'm not saying it's easy. I just think that it needs to happen. And like at the moment I'm struggling. I know it needs to happen, and yet I'm struggling. And right, and when I talk about these people like border agents, the prison guards, some motherfuckers enjoy this shit. Absolutely, some people enjoy this power tripping, but I still have faith that and that is just my the spiritual realm here, that I don't think that's what humans are. I don't think that's all we are. We have the propensity to maybe, go that route. So then how do we build a society that enhances the other parts, right? Like that allows the other parts to flow. And I'm not saying like design like from this technical standpoint. How do we build it together? How do we all pitch in? And so that's the big riddle, because it's not just about like going to protest or it's, for me, that's where I call it revolution. It's literally take over spaces as a group, running things how we want to run it. And that is a fuck you to private property and the plans that they have. And they will come hard after people who try to do this. They have done it already. It's part of history, and we have to understand
that. Well, Allison, do you want to say anything? I guess I'll just say that the one thing I think that unites all four of us here is the notion that I think the question of go big or go home is true for all of us. Like, I think that is the terms of this. Now, how do we get to the go big? I think all of us are struggling on how to even piece it together. I think we all feel pretty far away from that big vision of a different kind of world. But I think that is the one question I think that unites us all, or one thing that unites us all here is it is go big or go home. Those are the stakes to me.
It's big or going to the transhuman system.
Yes, or go into the metaverse and enjoy yourself.
Well, I would say, like, I don't have a good response on. I've been like the last probably 6 months very hermity, like, and I should probably do better. I think it's like, this is a marathon, right? And so I kind of realize, like, you have different stages of this thing. I mean, Kenny, it sounds like you've got that too. You do stuff, and then you have to pull back or you reflect. I think, Jessica, what you said early on about like the anthropocentrism, and Andy also about being connected to nature. I think in taking over spaces or connecting, I increasingly feel like there is a like energetic connection between people and natural systems. It doesn't have to be wilderness systems, but like the stand that we take it's for the more than human. And it's for those that can't agree to this plan, right? I mean, I kind of joke on Twitter. I'm like, I stand with the yeast, that's being re-engineered to make stupid spider silk, right? Like this poor yeast in the bioreactor, and I'm like, can the yeast say no, thank you? I'd really prefer not to be genetically engineered to make spider silk. Like, but that is because literally I talked to this guy last week who's a Penn like scientist, and now he does something different, but he used to engineer yeast. Like, he didn't even know about Ginkgo Bioworks. But I'm like, we're not that far off of a pile of yeast, like when you really get right back down to it. So like, where is this line? And so I feel like having like grounding in terms of the spaces, like maybe the space is a physical, like architectural space in a city, but then maybe it's also the connecting to the nature stuff, because I think there's an energetic resonance there that I think they know. Like, I think they understand the interconnectivity of the cosmology of people and place and other beings. And they're getting in there with their frequency waves and all that stuff to try to break that up. But I think situating in there, and then, like maybe even small, like, for me, if you think about it from a frequency level and understanding all the nano, maybe it doesn't have to be big. I think it includes music. Like, I think it includes food. I think it includes nature. Like, the idea that maybe we like develop a whole co-housing thing, like off the bat, like that's going to be too hard. But like, you could totally have a potluck with music and food, like local food in a park, just what you did. You took your families to a park and you were outside and you connected, and that's very powerful. So I don't know. I'm not trying to diminish, but like maybe like don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like start with the thing, and maybe that thing is just like 5 people on a picnic or something, and then it builds. But I don't know. I wish I had more energy. It's hard. This has been a slog. I mean, we all know how much of a slog it's been. And
yeah. First thing I want to say to people who've watching this is that we only touched a narrow slivers of Allison's set of articles. I mean, I think there's some ideas that we touched on that are threading through her articles, but so I really urge people to take a look at the beginning of the 9-part series, which might be 10 to a 12 by the time you take a look at it. But it's really worth looking at the things she's writing and some of the resources. And the other things we didn't touch on are just some of the historical documents you cite, the modern historical documents and the past historical documents. Those left an impression on me as well. So I think, so I'm just urging people.
Ezra Gosney writing Du Bois, telling him like, no, you don't understand the fertilization or the sterilization program. You just had the facts. I was just like, wow, that's amazing. That.
Yeah, and the thing about where that letter they were sending to FDR about, hey, I've been talking with Einstein. We've got some ideas about how we could split an atom and make some energy out of it. Yeah,
but health, not just defense. We've got this health. We got our eye on the health stuff. Exactly. We want those radiological isotopes for sure.
So maybe we'll call it a day right there. Well, thanks, Allison, for joining us again.
It's good hanging out.
We'll see if we want to do part 2, but let's talk about it after we sign off here. Okay. So that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode or on our blog, what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes of this podcast channel there and connect with us. I remind people, if you like anything you heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of the 9 platforms that we're on: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. And you can find our blog or any of those links in the episode notes, wherever you found this episode. If you'd like to give us feedback or make any comments, please put them on our episode here. And let us know, or if you have any suggestions for something to cover, contact us through our blog. Allison, thank you. And Jessica, welcome back. And Kenny, as always, good to be here with you. That's it for this week. And we'll see what we bring to you next week. It might be Allison, it might not.
That's fine.
All right, take care.
All right, bye guys.